Hello, everyone. Welcome to, I believe, week 12's wrap up. As you notice, the weeks and the discussion number are off, so it can get a little bit confusing. My apologies, or we should just thank spring break for that. Um, cool. So I think I looked, and I think after this one we have, so we're at discussion 11. So after this one, we have four more left. I think I said it last week, we are rounding the corner and getting close to finishing. That's kind of exciting. Couple of housekeeping things. I'm working on grading your teaching philosophies. I told you in the announcement, just so I wasn't leaving anyone hanging, I strive to get everything back to students in 1 to 2 weeks. I'm on the latter side of that. Normally, I'm actually really quick because I know what it's like to be in your shoes. I also, that's one of my anxieties as a teacher, is having papers to grade. Unfortunately, I just have too many papers to grade. It's just the wrong time in the semester. So I'll return those back in the next couple of days. Probably they'll start to trickle in towards you. The next thing, anybody who wants to schedule a meeting with me about your annotated bibliography or have questions and need feedback on those questions, I would suggest to start doing that. I read through a couple last week of people who either sat with me in the open office hours that I held, or for people who sent me them. And I had a couple of comments on those, really more so engaging with the topic and thinking about the annotations a little bit more. But yeah, I just want to know that you're all thinking about them. Some of you you're adults who are professionals, you might just be like, I can do this assignment on my own a little bit more. So that's fine. We'll look at these in draft form so that you'll get an opportunity to get some feedback on them before you have to turn in the final. So that should be helpful. Finally, the curriculum design groups. Those will be meeting at some point next week for the last time. So you want to get that third thing done, and then I would, if I were you, start thinking about how you're going to put that together. I know that in the assignment, what I say is that, let's see, sorry, I'm pulling this up just so I remember. So the meetings were to help you construct some of the things in the portfolio. So the assignment itself is a portfolio. And I ask you for 4 of the curriculum components. The 3 that you've done in your group. So that should be really easy. And then the last one, I'm asking for a larger umbrella document, a syllabus, a comprehensive unit plan, a comprehensive lesson plan, assignment and heuristics, other things too. Like, I don't want you to limit them, but that's the last one. So you have 3 that you've put together with this group, and then you have 1 that you want to put together. So I'm going to use Aaron as an example. He keeps talking about an explainer video. He could definitely, like, your group has come up with something else. He could add to this curriculum design portfolio an explainer video, and the assignment would be an assignment sheet and some heuristics for the assignment sheet. The goal being that you come out of this class with some crowdsourced curriculum material and somewhere where that's housed. So what I've said is what I would like, the portfolio format for me, you could just turn in a Word document with these 4 items with it. I was trying to encourage you to think about putting them in sort of a multimodal format. You can put them in a Google Drive folder, and you could design the activities like you would present them in class. You could use Scribd or PowerPoint. You could develop a website through Wix or Weebly. Or you could decide to launch a pilot course shell using your campus learning management software. You would just have to give us or myself permission to view this. So the possibilities are kind of endless. I'm encouraging you to do a multimodal format. I'm not, especially if you're technologically challenged at this point, and you're overwhelmed, I'm not making you do it. But just like the teaching philosophy, this is one of those, I think, professional things that would really help you to build on. I could probably also send you an example of, I don't have one like this, but I have one. I can send you an example of one of my colleagues, and I think he's put together a really nice thing. So we talked about that. So that the two final big, when I say big, I put it in quotation marks, assignments are the curriculum design portfolio, which you should be wrapping up at least the group part this week. From now until from after that until the end of the semester, the two things you have to think about is what larger umbrella document you want to put together, and then what format you want to put those in. And when you finish that, you're absolutely welcome to turn it in. You don't have to wait until the end. So say, for instance, your group has done a really good job and you have all three of the assignments, and maybe, and I've told you guys this all semester, maybe you have a syllabus and you just have to tweak it a little bit to include the stuff that your group talked about. Or maybe you want to revise it anyway, considering some of the stuff we talked about in your class. And maybe you do that this weekend because you just have time and you put it up on a Wix site. You could turn that in this weekend. I'm okay with that if it helps get it off of your thing. Obviously, it's due when it's due, and I don't need it before then. But yeah, so let's get started. Michelle asked some really great questions. I mean, like I said, nothing new. You all semester have been asking good questions. You've been thinking, whether you've been teaching for a long time or, like Michelle kind of said, like this is her first semester being a TA. You're starting to, even if you've been thinking a long time, you're bringing some of the framework in to your teaching. And for those of you who haven't been teaching for a long time, are really starting to grapple with some of these bigger questions about teaching. And I think this is one of the difficult weeks. The readings are definitely very interesting, as I could tell from what you guys said. You all were interested in them. But the concepts and the situations you end up in your classroom that take you to these readings can be really difficult. So Michelle let us off great. I thought I'd start with this really interesting quote from Mitchell, who says, "As I asserted then, and I believe now, college training in writing is more than learning punctuation and grammar. It's about more than knowing when and how to use commas or quotation marks. Rhetorical training is about learning to think and read critically, to analyze thoroughly, and to write clearly. It would be irresponsible to provide students opportunity to practice on issues that are pertinent to their lives, votes, nation, campus. Thus, given the course goals, the university's expectations that students be trained for civic participation, and the fact that the introductory composition course is usually the only course in reading and writing that all students must take, these courses are institutionally located to conduct theoretical and practical work of studying the discursive construction of difference." Interesting stuff here. So some of you teach K through 12. A lot of you many of you teach high school. That's different, right? That's a different rhetorical space for you all. in Arizona, they're working on hearing a bill that fines teachers who bring political content into their classroom. I think anecdotally, most of the high school teachers I know don't purposely try to bring political content into classroom. But the question being, how far is too, like, what do they mean by, who gets to decide to define political content? And that's at the legislative level. So at the district level, the school, the K through 12 schools definitely have a policy on this, and they have a curriculum, and the policy and the curriculum are meant to have students not intentionally be taught politics. However, I think that the quote that I read from Mitchell raises an interesting question. Are our classrooms ever free from politics? And when I say politics, I don't mean politics in like Republican or Democrat, but like can our classroom ever just be this neutral space? A lot of you teach literature still in your classrooms. Like, literature comes from political spaces. So I think it was Aaron who talked about a lesson in To Kill a Mockingbird. Like, To Kill a Mockingbird's a pretty political book. It gets into some deep issues, and you know, under a classroom that's free from politics, like, I would imagine that you couldn't teach that book. However, there's a difference between a teacher saying, like, this is what you should think, and here's a bunch of different things. So I think that's the foray here, and I think that K through 12 teachers definitely have to be more careful than college teachers. A lot of college institutions, we could pull it up for Mankato. Have a mission statement, and a lot of those mission statements have something to do with diversity and inclusion. So for instance, at ASU, one of the things is it's about ASU is defined but not who it excludes, but who includes, and to what end or something. And so I'm guided by the principle, by the mission that ASU is about inclusion. So one of the university's website says, we believe that a diverse campus is critical in order for our students, faculty, and staff to be engaged and productive members of a global society. So that's like part of the university's thing about diversity. And so when your university or your college has that as part of its mission statement, you know, like, I think that if that's included, if you're able to include that in your curriculum, or if you decide to include that in your curriculum, if you're the one who makes your curriculum, then you're not outside the realm, unless you're like, this is progressive politics, or this is Republican politics, or this conservative politics, or this is liberal politics, and I'm teaching you how to be a liberal. Like, that's different than, let's consider, you know, like, one of the things that I like to do in my classroom is I like to get people thinking globally. I think that gets them out of, like, Americans and race. So we watch, there's an NGO, Mama Hope, and they have some really interesting videos about thinking about Africans, and they're funny and interesting. And so I have my students watch that, and I think that gets them thinking along different lines. It gets them out of the United States and gets them thinking about these things elsewhere. And I think in their writing, they can reflect about how that works here sometimes. And I think they have a little bit of a different vision once they've seen it somewhere else. So anyway, so let's see. Anthony talked about like some of the more radical students being a little bit difficult, that he certainly encounters students that have political viewpoints, but the more radical students are the harder ones to budge. So he had this, I just sort of kind of laughed at this one because I don't know what to say about this one, but he had school and the state as a student kind of go off on school in the state as a gigantic bourgeois institution and power and all this stuff. And honestly, I just thought it was funny, and I don't know what I would do in that situation, but kind of think it was funny. And I don't know, I would have to tell that student at some point, well, you kind of have to play by the rules if you want to get a grade and a job, but I guess you can like go live off the grid and that would be fine. I don't know. So yeah, we all have encountered that student. Aaron had a student. I can't remember if he said he asked the student in private or in public, but an African American student in his class at teaching To Kill a Mockingbird, and being able to ask that student about his experiences, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, is one of the few or only Black students in the class, and the student shared his experience with that. And I think that can be really powerful if everyone's really respectful and listening. And if the student wants to share, I've definitely overstepped that bound before by asking a student who, whether they're a minority themselves or they're just a minority in the classroom at that point in time, like, oh, has this ever happened to you? And I had to reflect on it later, like, was I using that person kind of in a wrong way? Certainly if a student volunteers, that kind of stuff, and I'm not accusing Aaron of doing that. I don't know if I have this situation completely right, but I know that I have definitely done that myself before, because I was reaching for straws. So I'll tell you, the story is I taught a lesson. I thought it would be a really interesting thing. Like, students are writing these sort of identity profiles of themselves, and not exactly just racial or gender or whatever, but they're writing these identity profiles of themselves. And I thought it would be an interesting exercise to think about privilege and white privilege and all this stuff. And so we went through Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, which is a really interesting it's a really interesting piece. And she has this whole, like, a bunch of different lines, like, where students can either check or uncheck or raise their hand, like, I feel safe walking through my neighborhood. Like, I see other people that look like me every day, right? And my students were starting to revolt, and I had one Latina student in class, and I asked her how she felt, and you could just tell she was like, I'm not speaking for, Latina women, and she just was silent. And I could tell right there that was the wrong call. Is that in a class that just wasn't very diverse, that were getting upset about thinking of white privilege, that I asked the one of the few minority students in class, and she was like, yeah, I'm not speaking to this. And I'm like, okay, well, this is a learning experience for me, and I'm not going to do this again unless students volunteer. So I have since scrapped the white privilege in class exercise, because it definitely failed on me. Lori talked about how she having students do an identity matrix activity can diffuse the power, and having individuals locate where their power lies and how it shifts according to situation. I think that's an interesting in-class assignment. I don't even want to shy you away from doing it. I just want you to understand that I think that's hard work for students, that's hard work for 18-year-olds, is to be really self-reflexive. I think that I don't know, I would love to have followed some of my students later on in life and ask them, like, in 5 years, did they really pick up on some of the things we talked about in the class? Because that's some of the transfer research talks about. This is when they get it. But it can be hard work. I've been in classes where it's definitely worked out well, but I've also been in classes where it's failed. So I think Michelle talks about like the self-care work you do for yourself at the end, or I forget how she phrases it, but in doing some of these hard assignments and getting students to be really reflexive about themselves, some of whom don't want to do that, make sure you're doing some self-care for yourself, because I definitely walked out a couple of those classes going, gosh, I didn't do that right. And I feel really crappy about myself as a teacher. Austin says, although Radcliffe questions the idea that people who haven't lived through certain kinds of experiences don't have business teaching about them, I don't feel as though I am any kind of expert on the rather complex discourses that surround the discussion of diversity. I know enough to know what my own beliefs are, and I try to live by those and model those in the classroom as well in all parts of my life, but I don't feel that confident about the idea that I could provide my students a smooth entry into those discourses without potentially doing unintended harm. I think that I have many colleagues who don't feel comfortable in these spaces. If you wanted, I think that Radcliffe makes a point about the kind of work that you need to do if you felt called or comfortable, or like that this work was something you needed to be doing. Maybe you do work for one of the colleges who has diversity in its mission statement, and so you feel like you should be doing this work, then Radcliffe says that there are some ways to fill in your life experience. I think I also said to Austin too, is like, my students have filled in some of that life experience. I think that we have to be kind to ourselves. We can't have done everything. At the same time, you can't make assumptions about people and what it's like to be certain types of people or categories of people, or to live in certain identities. So I think that one of the things that I learned through sometimes is my own students writing and the stories they tell. So for example, let's see, who was it? Let's see, I can't remember who it was. One of the students talked about, or one of you all talked about, a student just being, what do you do when students are just really like, I don't want to do this assignment? I think I try to listen to students, and I think the thing that, and this is why it's piggybacking off of what Austin says, is that part of the work of listening to students helps you understand people more expansively. I've listened to enough students talk about the complex situations of their lives that when a student says, I don't want to do this work, I don't think it's important or something, in my head, I'm not thinking, wow, this is a terrible student. I'm thinking, what else is going on in their life? Why do they not feel that this work is important right now? And so I think that is even just a shift of thinking that can be caused by learning from your students about their lives. Ethan talks about having a safe space to help show students that they are able to be themselves in their opinion matters. Teaching about LGBTQ plus issues, show them the instructor cares about them, and this can be said for a multitude of diversity of courses. Acknowledging their assistance is the first step in making them feel valued and comfortable. I think there's small accommodations that you can make. So I've had, in teaching online classes, I've had students who are transitioning, and whether it's the state or the university or just the complexity of changing a name, their name comes up as the name in their previous gender, and that's what the learning management system says. And so I have to consciously remember to call them by their name and the name that they want and their preferred pronoun. But a lot of students say they feel very valued that I do that. Because they are not afforded the same by their other professors. because that's a hard thing in an online space because we can't see you all. Andrew, let's see, he talks about that it's fairly easy to tell the difference between a student who's genuinely sharing an opinion and a student who's just being purposely malicious or crude. In terms of an honest discussion, I do try to create a space in which students can stand by their personal beliefs. I never pull any power cards and make my personal views oppressive. Yeah, I think that that's a good point, is that students come from a lot of different places. Students hold beliefs for certain reasons, and letting them explain those to an extent helps. I think we can imagine, like, I think that sometimes you can't imagine situations that come up in your classroom. But, I think it's always been few and far between, is that somebody will be expressing their beliefs and they'll cross a line. And I have to think about it. Like, what is my place? And I personally think it's my place to step in and say, I think you've crossed it, like, very clear, like, I think you've crossed a line. And I have to think about what my lines are. And they come, I think what Andrew said is somebody who's trying to be offensive and malicious, not somebody who is trying to express an opinion. So yeah. Christina, I think that she navigates a really interesting space, talking about pushing her students on topics and kind of stirring the pot and getting them really agitated, but herself being able to maintain composure in those situations and not let any of her cards show as to where her ideology falls. That's just really a tough thing for me. Not to say that, like, I come into class as an ideological person, but when we're in that space and I'm stirring and pushing students, and maybe it's just my own bad reading of myself. I just don't have a poker face. It's not that I'm about ready to come out and say, hey, this is who I am and this is how I believe. Or if a student says, I think everything the president's doing is amazing, I'm like, you lie. That wouldn't be it. But it's just hard for me to have a poker face, I guess. And so, especially in a situation where you're getting students riled up. Not to say that I can't go into a classroom and play devil's advocate and go back and forth. It's just that eventually I reveal myself. But I think I strive to do that. Allie talked about writing as a way to learn, and talking about that same Mitchell quote that I wrote up, having students do writing that pertains to their lives. And I think she was talking about character studies as, like, how useful is that writing? And I kind of ruminate on, well, like, what about having them build personality quizzes, like, which character am I? I know that's more playful of a genre, but it could be really fun, and they could really take something from that. Again, not exactly writing constitutions, but definitely something playful and interesting. Aria talked about how free writing, giving students the opportunity just to write in a bunch of different forms, get student at writing different things, and then having students write in anything other than APA or MLA style, and having students understand different writing. I'm a big fan of having students just write genres. Like, if they're going to write a memo, write a memo. And sometimes I ask them for a bibliography of the sources they used for my own benefit, and sometimes I don't. And so they struggle. They struggle with, well, should I cite my sources? And I was like, well, how does a memo cite their sources? How would you cite a source if you were, like, writing a memo to someone else? Would you use APA format, or would you use MLA? And I have them deal with some of those uncomfortable things. Oh, there you go. Dana, you were the one who talked about having students meet resistance from... oh, no, wrong person. you talked about, I think that this is a really interesting thing that you had a professor say, if it makes you uncomfortable, you should probably teach it. Um, Maybe, I don't know. Um, that seems, like I said, I think it's hard to see the classroom as a completely apolitical space. That's my own personal opinion. I think that there's already politics surrounding our classroom, and then a bunch of people come into those spaces from various places. And so there are politics all over our classrooms, from the institution, from the state you live in, from the school you live in, school you're at, from the communities that you're in. And they're coming into our classrooms, and making the classroom completely apolitical to me is just, it seems difficult, but not impossible. Some of you seem to do really well. Some of you talked in your discussions that you seem to do really well at this stuff. And so I could probably learn a little bit more from you. And again, not to say that my classroom's really political, but when we deal with hard issues, like race or gender or something like that, they become really, these days become really charged really quickly. But preparing for resistance, I think, is where Dana was talking about. Again, I've been teaching for 12 years. And you can, I think, preparing for resistance, reading it, thinking of worst case scenarios, and then definitely like getting even different case scenarios. Resistance comes in many forms from many people. Last semester, it was a student who was extremely, my English 101 class was themed thinking about the O.J. Simpson stuff. And so we thought of it from a lot of different ways. We watched a lot of different documentaries. And I thought it was a really interesting way to bring in millennial students, or whatever the generation is. I think I'm a millennial. But there was a lot of like millennial rediscovering the O.J. Simpson stuff in the wake of a documentary and a Ryan Murphy series. And so I thought we'd go through that, and we'd read some stuff back from the trial and stuff today, and we'd really think of ourselves as cultural critics. And a student, some of the Ryan Murphy series, a lot of the OJ stuff doesn't really take into account the victims. And one of the female students called me out on that. Like, why don't we have, like, we're thinking about feminism and women and women's place in the 90s when we're talking about the lawyers in the trial, but not a lot of time spent on domestic violence and Nicole Brown Simpson, the victims. And so she kind of called me on that, and that was where her resistance lied. And that was an uncomfortable class period for me. I didn't have a good answer, and it wasn't built into my curriculum. And the way that I addressed it was putting it in a revised version, is going through and finding sources. And I asked her, if she would feel comfortable writing her paper about it, and that maybe I can use some of the sources for my syllabus. She chose not to do that, and I don't know if that was like a spite thing, like I'm not gonna do this work for you. You have to do it on your own. And when I say spite, I don't mean negatively, but it was definitely a learning experience for me. And I think that that's one of the things you're hearing from me this week, but also our reading, is that in dealing with complex subjects, listening to our students and listening to their resistance and hearing about where it comes from and why it comes from is definitely important. And then being able to navigate the rhetorical space of the classroom enough that you know where you draw the line and how you react when a line is crossed. Ashley talked about understanding the importance of resisting offense in a classroom that should be a safe space, as Mitchell describes, more than encouraging political correctness. And she said she wants to create an atmosphere where students can learn about different cultures or contexts of life from different students, so that this offense may be stayed on an understanding level. And I think that that's kind of one of the things we're getting at. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to stop here because I was rambling about a couple of things in the beginning. But thank you all very much, and I look forward to this week and look forward to reading more of your teaching philosophies. Thank you.